Hi, welcome back to Analyzing the Magnus Protocol. My name is Jack, and I'm going to be analyzing Magnus Protocol Episode 39 Dependence and Episode 40 Public Image. If you enjoy these, of course, please subscribe for content that I hopefully post frequently. With that, let's just jump straight into Episode 39 Dependence, which we start with, the plan that the Archives gang had in the last 137, planning to find some familiar places. Sam recognizes a house that him and Georgie are going to as Alice's old parents' house. He mentions that he helped her move when they assumably had an argument about Alice being trans or something. That's what I take from it. And then Sam wonders if Alice's parents could be alive still, with Georgie commenting that it's not likely, as elderly people didn't really survive the incursion as much as normal people did. Yet, some survived, but most of them did not. Which makes sense in most ways. Georgie says, well, if, since they're likely not alive still, they won't mind if I go in. And Sam is like, you can't just walk into someone's house. What if the police are called? And Georgie just, is like, no. And she goes into the house, leaving Sam outside. Just, he starts humming to himself, hearing commotion and arguing coming from inside the house. So he calls out for Georgie, in which Alice comes running out saying like, oh my god, how are you here? I didn't believe them when they told me. And she kisses him. And then Georgie comes back and is like, I'll wait. And Sam is like, whoa, hang on. There's a lot I gotta tell you. And then it kind of fast forward skips in the kitchen, and Alice is like, so you're not my Sam, you're Sam from different universe. Sorry for kissing you. And Sam says that in his reality, they aren't together, where Alice says, oh, we're married, or were, as Sam in the Archives universe is dead. Saying that her and her Sam got married a month before, and shortly after Towerfall, which is her way of, saying after the end of the incursion, that he died of appendicitis because there were very few doctors and very few medical supplies, so he just kind of died. Which is interesting because Sam, like our Sam, lifts up his shirt and that he has a scar where he would have died of his appendicitis, but his world wasn't fucked up. Alice explains that and her Sam shared a domain during the incursion, to which Georgie asks if Alice dreamed because she saw medication on her nightstand. Sam, a little confused, asking what they're talking about, and Alice explains that after Towerfall, everyone would revisit their domain in their dreams, which is horrifying to think about. Not to the extent to which their domains, tortured them sort of thing, but they would still, revisit it. And people who share domains would often dream with the same people, to which Sam asks Alice what, they dreamed about. And Alice goes off on a little bit of a tangent, basically saying that in her dreams, Alice is at work, someone is demanding to return something, and she says, we can't really do that, so she just goes into the back to waste their time. But when she goes into the back, she is tangled by curtains. And at first, she is worried that, she made herself a fool and she just tripped or something. But she begins to panic and she, struggles against the fabric. And it is weird because it is warm and wet, and she begins to claw at it. She then stops in realizing that she is rocking back and forth. And she hears this rumbling sound all around her. And then it gets to a point where she can't tell the difference between this rumbling sound and her own blood rushing through her ears. But she eventually realizes that the thing rumbling is her heartbeat, and she is entrapped in her own flesh. She then notices a piece of grit inside of her and tries to reach for it, but it is too buried deep within herself, and she feels it inside herself as she struggles and begins to realize she is trapped within herself. But eventually she just kind of lets loose, letting her bones crack and break as she twists inside herself into something like unrecognizable. Suddenly then, Sam is there inside her with her. And she describes how they like feel themselves twist and break and become one, but like suffering together, but within each other's bodies. Very weird, very horrible stuff. After this, though, she just sort of stops. Georgie and Sam essentially begin to leave, and it is very sad. And Alice just begs him to not. Don't leave me.
I'm afraid we need to head off.
It's no bother. There's loads of space, and I've still got some food left. I don't eat much, so I'd be happy to share.
We really need to get back. Warden business.
Don't go.
Georgie and Sam get to a point where Georgie is like pulling Sam along. He's like, don't look back. Just keep walking. Georgie explained that most dreamers are like Alice in that they're just broken. And it's just a lingering nightmare that they can't walk away from. And then there's a cool little dialogue in which Sam is like trying to wrap his head around about loving someone so much that they would like do that to themselves, in which Georgie says that isn't love, that's grief. But then Sam responds with, at that point, what's the difference? Interesting. And then Sam just stops as they're walking and is like, didn't Alice seem a little more articulate than normal? And then they think for a moment, and Georgie is like, archivist? Maybe. Calls in a patrol to see if they can get them there. And then she's like, oh fuck. And Sam is like, what? And she opens her bag, and it's like, tape recorder. Shit, I checked everywhere. I didn't check my damn bag. And they like toss the tape recorder on the ground as they run back to the house. And then we hear little archivists in the background, like lingering. This one is horrific. This one's traumatic. I personally don't know what it feels like to be trans, but I can imagine that if it was like a fear manifested, that would be it. You know, being trapped in oneself sounds horrifying as hell. Other than that, great episode. I'm really excited to see what happens after that. Like, is Archives Alice just gonna die? Or, you know, the archivist gonna get to her? Or what's going to happen with that? That's gonna be very interesting to find out. Nevertheless, though, let's continue on to episode 40. Public image starts off at Berlin Airport with Alice and Starkwall security personnel, Dane Bowie, who is played by Derek Vallon. God, I love this guy so much. He's a Starkwall operator, and he gives a rundown about like, all right, you listen to me, all right? You know, I tell you to drop, you drop. I tell you run, you run. Blah, 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 blah. And just the way he talks, I don't know if I want to punch him or if I'm just gonna laugh. Probably both. But like, the shit he says and the way he says it is just hilarious. Alice, Christ, here we go. Dane, I take it? That's affirmative, ma'am. Dane Bowie, Starkwall Service Group. You're Alice Dyer, the civilian asset. Yeah, civilian asset, that's me. I got a basic sit prep from control. Possible single or unorthodox hostile. Affirmative? You ever worked with an operator before, ma'am? My brother plays a lot of Call of Duty. And then, yeah, that's when he's like, well, this is the real thing. And I tell you to drop, you drop. I tell you to run, you run. Blah, 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 blah. And if you understand that, I might be able to keep you alive. And then Alice is like, well, gosh, Dane. Gosh, well, thank you, Dane. I'm glad you've got to protect me through the dangerous war zone that is Berlin Airport. And he says, all part of the job, ma'am. Just completely oblivious to her remarks. And then she's like, why are you wearing sunglasses? Glare kills careless operators, makes it harder to see the details, especially against camouflaged bogies. And then she's like, it's 7 at night and we're indoors. can't be too careful, ma'am. And then she's like, yeah, all right, speaking of which, and then he runs into a woman who, like, yells at him in German or something. And then Alice is like, how about we just leave, please? And he says, affirmative, stay frosty. and she's like, Roger Wilco, Snowman 1. We cut to the OIR with Gwen and Celia. Basically, Celia is like, it feels just empty around here, doesn't it? And she kind of expected Alice to be like, say a goodbye, and then Gwen is like, it's Alice. She wouldn't have said anything if she didn't need me to pay for everything. And then Gwen is like, yeah, you're probably right. With Sam and Colin gone, maybe I should hire some new people. And Celia's like, what the fuck, you think this is a suitable work environment? And Gwen says, the truth is that if people just behave in a professional manner, this is a relatively safe environment. Celia says you might want to work on the pitch, and Gwen is just, it's not a pleasant job, but someone has to do it. To which Celia is like, do they though? And then Gwen just walks off saying you're behind on your caseload. And then we cut back to a phone, Dane or probably Alice's. Oh god, this guy. I got eyes on the AO. I'm not liking the sightlines. Too easy for someone to get a bead. And then Alice is just, yeah, a bit spooky. What do you think they used to make here? Outside of the toy workshop. The workshop will know to have toys in it. Eventually, in a second. Look, standard operating procedures for a semi-hostile environment. I'll go in, sweep the perimeter, check for any hostiles, then establish an extraction route in case we need a tactical retrograde for the civilian assets. And Alice is like, that's me! And then Dane's like, affirmative. Dane pulls out a gun. He's like, I'll be back in 5 minutes. And Alice is like, can you have that here? And he's like, every country operating within Stark Wall, services, I'm allowed to have this gun in Germany. Alice just put the fucking gun away. And he's just, no can do, ma'am. This is an active field operation, and I have duty of protection. Now, as I was saying, you stay here, and Alice is like, no, fuck you. And she walks in and he yelled, hey, that's not AOA. Hey, the AO is not cleared. And she shuts the door behind him, and she just starts walking. And it cuts out, and the phone cuts back in, and they're just in the workshop now. Dane walks up behind her. He's like, ma'am, I need you to stay on my 6. And he runs around with the gun. He's like, clear. Clear. It's so stupid. And Alice is like, I don't know if this place would count as clear. And Dane says, wooden puppets don't count as hostiles, ma'am. And Alice is like, did they fucking tell you what we were dealing with? And then he's like, no. I was given a basic sit rep, ma'am. Though, I admit, it didn't include, how, and she's like, how scary it was? And he's like, unorthodox the RV would be. Any signs of your contact? And then we get the lad himself.
Any sign of your contact?
You
Contact!
I was expecting.
Hands where I can see them. Hands where I can see them. Right now!
Did I frighten you? Entschuldige, such was not my intention.
Heinrich and Heimlich, who is voiced by, I got it right here, who is voiced by Robert Vernon. And it's got this, it's really cool audio filter they do over the voice, because it's not really sure what he's packing. I think, he's got a hat, or at least that's what I see most fan art him with, and he's just this wooden or straw, just giant fucking doll. We hear him moving around in the warehouse a little later, and it's these very heavy footsteps. It's really cool. Sound design incredible in this episode in particular. Dane is immediately like, hands up, show me hands. And he points the gun at him. And Dane, who is fucking scared out of his mind right now, is like, don't fucking move or I'll shoot you. Heinrich is just like, messy. Too much bluster, too much bravado for coming from this man. Alice is just, Dane, put the gun down. He could have, like, killed us if he wanted to right now. Yeah, then he's like, Heinrich is like, oh, you're not Colin. I was expecting to meet with Colin. Alice is like, Colin's, like, dead because of the computer thing that he was wanting to talk to you about. And then Alice asks, how did you know him? And Heinrich explains that it was some years ago, but he doesn't really know because he doesn't follow time. Weird. He was contacted by a man doing some programming for Das Ministerium für that, and it involved many like him, and he is one of the more amendable of his kind. Assumably other externals? But the person's notes eventually got into Colin's hands, and then Colin was like backtracking research and wanted to meet up with Heinrich. And then Alice is like, okay, what was in it for you? And he's like, even a monster gets lonely. And he was basically just like, I want him to program video game for me so I can scare the kids of today, because kids these days aren't scared of the shit I used to scare them back then. He's like, the workshop isn't a comfortable place, but I bought a chair for Colin. And then Dane, the bastard, is like, hey, that's a negatory. We're not moving anywhere from here with you. Because Heinrich is also like, I don't want to be next to this fucking loser with a gun. And then Dane is also just like, what are you? And Heinrich is like, I'm Heinrich und Heimlich. I am the toy that gives the children nightmares. And then Alice is like, the toy maker, right? And he's like, toy maker, toy, all in the same thing. And then Dane's like, all right, you better start talking some sense here before and Heinrich's just, all right, you want my story? I'm going to give you my story right now. And then he's like, do you not want to sit in the chair? I bought it for €60. She's like, how the fuck did this guy get money to buy a chair for Colin, but he's got a chair, €60. You don't want to sit in the chair? I bought it for you. It cost €60. And then Dane is just, I don't give a shit about your chair. But this is when we get into the case, and Heinrich und Heimlich explains the story of how it came to be. So, basically, I like how he starts it, because he says, once upon a time, I believe that's how you start them, yes? So basically, a few hundred years ago, there was a wooden doll, and it was crude and sort of blackened by fire and scorched, leaving its face really burned and just like divots of like where the eyes used to be. But this little wooden doll delighted in giving children splinters, and it was owned by a mischievous little girl who named it Heinrich und Heimlich. And she even came up with a little nursery rhyme to scare other kids.
Heinrich und Heimlich, willst du mit mir spielen? Heinrich und Heimlich, bist du in den Dielen? Heinrich und Heimlich, oh bist du in Sicht? Heinrich und Heimlich, ich meine Eltern nicht.
But eventually one day the little girl and her parents disappeared, leaving behind all their belongings, including Heinrich und Heimlich. The doll eventually just sat in the window, and the other children would like point at it and be like, yo, spooky doll, that's Heinrich und Heimlich. And, it would say that it was the doll that like disappeared the family and the little girl, which delighted the doll. But the house remained unempty, and eventually the kids started, daring each other to go inside the house. And this, Heinrich und Heimlich found out it could hurt the kids, but is very unsatisfied in killing them. It instead preferred to scare them. It would allow the kids to run back to their friends, screaming, so it could feast on the fears of all the kids about this Heinrich und Heimlich. Then eventually, a boy who went into the house, his name was Hans, and he started to add to the story, claiming that Heinrich und Heimlich wasn't the toy, but rather the toy maker. He was a tall and thin man with a long black beard, sharp teeth, with a doll being only one of its creations. And then, when the toy heard the story, it made the toy maker real. And Heinrich would come to Hans, being its sort of chosen child to, like, spread the story and the fear and all that. He gave Hans a little like hobby horse in which it had like barred teeth and adults could not see when its mane would move. And Hans would tell the other children it was a gift from Heinrich und Heimlich. And it was until there was this other boy, whose name was Klaus, who didn't believe in Heinrich und Heimlich or this hobby horse, but the other kids began to believe Klaus instead of Hans. So it was one night that this hobby horse came into Klaus's home, mauled his parents to bits. It describes how it like chewed on their tongue, ripped out their insides, spat out their clothes, and this horrified Klaus. But Heinrich explains that over the years his workshop changed, and there was another chosen child of his named Ilsa, I believe, and it had a taste for gory. So his workshop would like morph into this like wooden hut outside of a forest that had like hanging kid skins, and the toys were made of flesh. They were varnished with like human fat. Heinrich gave this girl a set of army toys that scared the kids so much that they never saw combat. Vague as fuck. But it was the past few decades that have been particularly hard for this guy. Boo-hoo. You know, toys have changed over the years. Kids are less scared of literally everything. And he has gone years without having a sort of chosen child. But he believes that he will, you know, always adapt to the modern age, and he will do so eventually. Dane is then horrified that he killed kids, and Heinrich is just like, it happened. It's rare. I don't care for it. You know, corpses don't cry after all, is what he says. And Heinrich is like, and, you know, Dane is like, and the parents? And Heinrich's just like, yeah, some parents die. And he explains how, like, you know, I kill one parent and everyone is scared, everyone freaks out. Do it too often, the killings become fact, and it loses their, you know, their fear. And then this is when Alice just walks up to him, like, name's Alice. And Heinrich is like, Alice, grateful name. And then he talks to Alice, is like, I don't like him. Can we, like, go somewhere else to talk? And Dane is like, no, fuck you. I'm not leaving you alone with a civilian asset. And Heinrich is just, like, looking at Alice like, you know, it's gonna be harder to do this if we have this son of a bitch here. This is when Dane, like, steps up to Heinrich and, like, is like, you back off now. And Heinrich just, very smooth voice, very threatening, just, remove your hand from me. And then Dane says, I'm warning you. And then let me just read you what's, you know, the transcript notes. The toys suddenly spring forth and grab Dane. His screams in terror He screams in terror, fires off 2 shots. The gun is ripped from him along with the hand holding it. He thrashes in agony as he is viscerally disassembled. Alice, calm as fuck, terrified, don't get me wrong. Very, very calm, you know, good on you, girl. But eventually he's like, I really found that man intolerable, looks at Alice. He wasn't one of Colin's friends, was he? And Alice is like, no. And he's like, good. And then he kind of just like stares into Alice and is like, got some bubbling fear in you. And he's like, youthful, pure. We'll get along just fine. And Alice is just like, what do you want from me? And he's like, bitch, I figured you came here for questions. Go sit down in my chair. And Alice is like, okay. And then that's where that ends. God, very good episode. Again, the sound design in this one really popped off. Love to see Dane, sad to see him go. No, Heinrich und Heimlich, very cool character. Dane, very funny, American. And I'm really excited to see what happens in this. For me, it's tomorrow, which is probably when this is recorded, for the Patreon viewers at least. But no, I'm thinking, a little theory, I think maybe Alice might become Heinrich's new, like, chosen person. I don't know how that would work, But I don't know, just slap it on the bingo card. Excited to see what happens next in the next episode. So other than that, I guess if you have any theories, comments of your own, please leave them down in the description below. Leave a like and subscribe if you want, and I will see you all next time. Protocol episode 41.